Now, any question? I guess maybe we ran over your time.
We have a few minutes, so if there's any questions.
Philippine. Yeah, Muslim in Philippine time. Okay. In Mindanao, the southern part of Philippines, you do have the Muslims in those provinces, the southern provinces of Philippines. Of course, ethnically and linguistically, they are Javi-speaking people. They are cousins to Indonesians and Malaysians, because that whole area is a band of Javi-related ethnic groups. Now, their history is not very different from the history of the Indonesians and the Malay. Arab boats coming into the area settle in that region. And of course, they establish the same kind of relationship there as was done in Indonesia and Malaysia. Now, of course, the Filipino Muslims established their own kingdoms, just like they did in Patani, in what is now called Thailand, and in various provinces of modern-day Malaysia and Indonesia. What is different for them is that when the Spaniards came into the area, they were able to dislodge the Muslims in the region, and of course, they gradually took over portions of that island or islands which were inhabited by people not exposed to Islam, because you have so many different languages and ethnic groups in Philippines, just like Africa. So the Filipino experience is very similar to the African experience, where you have portion of the landmass or islands captured by one civilization and remaining portion unexposed or resistant to the dominant civilization. And then a challenging civilization, in this case European Christianity, coming in the person of the Spaniard into the region. And of course you had Portuguese coming also earlier, and the Dutch later. And these Spaniards gradually constitute a challenge to the Muslim presence. So you have a rivalry between an older Islamic presence versus a recently established Catholic presence. So you have a Muslim-Christian rivalry and competition. Now, what is very interesting in the Philippines, of course, is the American factor. In the 19th century, one American president said that he had a dream, and God told him, go there and take over. So, you remember him, right? So, he sent American troops to go in there, and of course, it was part of the expansion of America into the Pacific. And that began the marriage between Filipinos and the United States. Today, among the Southeast Asian groups, Filipinos are the largest in America, and they dominate the nursing business. Many of the nurses in many American hospitals are of Filipino origin in this country. And of course, even in the Arab world, like in the Gulf, many of those nurses in their hospitals came from Philippines and babysitters in those parts of the world. Now, because of the history, everything has a historical origin to it. Now, the Spanish-American influence in Philippines accounts for Filipinos having Spanish-sounding names. And it also accounts for the fact that they speak English as a language that integrates them. And of course, it also accounts for the privilege they got among all the Southeast Asian groups in the American society here. Now, the point I want to make is that the relationship between the Muslims and the ruling authorities in Philippines over the last 100 years has been very dicey because of the competition between the Christian churches on the one hand and the Muslim groups that are trying desperately to maintain Islam in that part of Philippines. And of course, you now have two major liberation groups, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the Moro Liberation Front. Now, of course, the Moro Liberation Front has been the dominant and oldest Islamic liberation group that would like to dislodge the authority of the central government in the southern provinces of Philippines. But the Filipino government has learned the same lesson that the Thais, the Russians, and other groups have learned. And that is, you bring people from other areas into the Muslim areas. And hopefully, over a period of time, you will outnumber the original inhabitants. That's an old strategy. It was done in the past. It happens to the Jews. You know, when Nebuchadnezzar came, that's how the kingdom of Solomon, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, the children of Solomon, that's how they lost that kingdom. I mean, you know, like the Jews were taken out of the area by Nebuchadnezzar. And of course, they were taken into what we now call Babylon in history. Imperialists learn from each other. So, I mean, you know, like, so in the case of Philippines, this is precisely what happened. The Muslims in Mindanao and the other provinces in southern Philippines are now being replaced, or at least forced to share space with transplanted Filipinos from other parts of the country. Just like the Russians did to the Tatars and the Chechenian Muslims. They took them out of Tatar area or Tajikistan or in Chechnya, they took them to Siberia. And they bring Russian families into the area. They did not only do that to Muslims, they did that to non-Muslims. They did that to the Christians in Lithuania and Estonia. You bring that's why the Estonians, they're independent, but they're not independent, because you still have large number of Russians in their country. The same thing happening in Philippines. The other point to bear in mind, and this brings us to the area of terrorism, is that you have Saifuddin group. This is a radical extremist group. They see themselves as the sword of the religion. And of course, this group has been the one that recently rounded up foreign tourists in southern Philippines, and the government was negotiating with them for the release of those German, Australian, I don't think they were Americans, I don't know. But I know there were German tourists who were involved there and some Australians. But this group has been responsible for the recent incident in that part of the world. And this is part of the larger problem of the Philippines. The government negotiated a deal under Marcos. Actually, Marcos' wife, Elmira, I think that's her name. Melda Marcos was the one who led the delegation to Tripoli. This was Gaddafi's chance to get fame in '73 when they negotiated a deal, a peace, a ceasefire. But of course, it didn't last. And today, you have this Moro Islamic Liberation Group challenging the authority of the central government. And of course, the new president of Philippines is desperately trying to work out a deal. So that's the situation in Philippines. I stop here, and I hope you have something from this presentation. Thank you.